The movie world and lawsuits go hand in hand, but it's specifically horror productions that crop up the most if you're searching for these cases. Now, a lot of these involve arguments over who owns the rights to iconic franchises, while some might have caused a big scene at the time, but were thrown out as little more than frivolous threats. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are horror movies that led to massive lawsuits. Number 9. Based on a true story taken to the extreme, the fourth kind. At this point, horror hounds know that the whole based on a true story gimmick is, well, just that, a gimmick. So many movies have loosely stretched that term so they can tick off an extra marketing box, and for the most part when you investigate these original stories, they're completely different to what made it on screen. While most productions will just vaguely tie the plot to real events and call it a day though, alien abduction thriller The Fourth Kind wanted a bit of that Blair Witch money. The whole marketing was based around convincing you and me that this was a true story of alien abduction, with the movie being built around recreations and archive footage of the apparent real abduction stories in Alaska. The studio went one step further to support the validity of these true story claims though, setting up websites and publishing articles about the abductions. However, the production also mixed this fiction with real news stories that were apparently used without permission, according to the IGN report at the time. The fact that the movie was not only suggesting then that these real disappearances were the cause of aliens, but also releasing news posts intended to be viewed as authentic that supported this idea, did not sit well with the people whose history was being used as a gimmick for the film. Consequently, Universal was sued and settled for over $20,000, removing the offending posts in the process. Number 8. Jesse Eisenberg's before he was famous horror movie, Camp Hell. For all movies, it's a long road from production to release, and a lot can happen within that time. For actors working on multiple projects, this period can actually be enough time for another one of their movies to release and rocket them to superstardom. Of course, having a rising star attached to a flick can increase the likelihood of success massively, and that's allegedly what the filmmakers were banking on with the shoddy horror Camp Hell in 2010. When it dropped on DVD, actor Jesse Eisenberg's face was splashed across the front cover, alongside his name receiving the sole credit on the marketing materials. Obviously, then, many people naturally assumed that this meant he was the star of the piece. That couldn't be further from the truth though, as Eisenberg has little more than a cameo role in the finished flick. According to THR, the actor was seemingly quite annoyed at this, and thus filed a lawsuit claiming the advertising would, quote, fraudulently induce his fans to purchase a copy of the DVD of the picture, end quote. Number 7. Adrien Brody didn't get his salary, Giallo. Giallo is a bit of a weird entry on this list. Its director, horror legend Dario Argento, is no stranger to controversy, but this case is definitely unique. Though the film itself, a by-the-numbers throwback about a detective on the hunt for a killer, was nothing to write home about, it did make international headlines thanks to its disgruntled star, Adrien Brody. Just after the flick premiered at festivals, Adrien Brody immediately slapped the filmmakers with a big fat lawsuit, claiming that he was extremely underpaid for the movie. Arguing that the salary agreed upon in his contract wasn't fulfilled, Brody didn't want the studio making money off his international appeal, while he himself wasn't fully compensated. And as a result, the home video release of Giallo was delayed while the lawsuit wasn't going. It took just under a year, but Brody was eventually awarded the remainder of his full salary, totaling around $640,000 according to the deadline write-up at the time, and Giallo finally got a proper release, not that the film itself was really worth the wait. Number 6. Allegations of ripping off a 1990 book, The Unborn. If you've never seen David S. Goyer's disappointing horror The Unborn, then you'll have definitely seen the poster, as the studio shamelessly chucked on a woman in her underpants in the hopes that the image would do the heavy lifting in selling it to audiences. The flick is a ghost story about a woman who's haunted by the ghost of her twin brother who died in the womb. It was mostly unremarkable, but it did catch the attention of author Ernest Segal's heir and relative, who apparently noticed similarities between the horror and one of Ernest's books called Transfers. Rather than simply accuse the movie of straight-up plagiarism over the similar story beats though, there was another wrinkle to the case. According to the person in question, there was some discussions to adapt the book at one point with the same production company that made The Unborn, which ultimately fell through. Consequently, THR reported that the lawsuit was entered on the grounds of a, quote, breach of an implied contract between the two parties. This didn't make it too far though, and the copyright suit was thrown out a year later, with the legal representative for the studio calling it a, quote, meritless and misguided lawsuit. Number 5. A simple scene gone wrong, Ghostland. Indie horror Ghostland received quite a bit of buzz before its release, gaining some strong support at a few film festivals. However, that was all overshadowed when news came out about a tragic on-set incident that left one of the actresses requiring 70 stitches. The performer in question, Taylor Hickson, sued the production company when a seemingly straightforward stunt that required her to emotionally beat against a glass door with her bare hands went wrong. The glass didn't support her impact and shattered, cutting Hickson's face in a way that permanently scarred. Deadline reported that Hickson is in the process of suing the producers for negligence, seeking damages for missed work due to the injuries and the extensive treatment required. Though this hasn't been settled at the moment, the production company in another case did plead guilty to, according to CBC.ca, quote, failing to ensure the safety and welfare of a worker under the Workplace Safety and Health Act, end quote, and was fined $40,000. Number 4. Accusations of plagiarism. The Cabin in the Woods. Another lawsuit surrounding an author claiming a major Hollywood production ripped off their work. This time it was Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard in the crosshairs following the release of the surprise hit The Cabin in the Woods. Here, author Peter Gallagher claimed that his book, The Little White Trip: A Night in the Pines, was ripped off by the film. As reported by The Wrap, the $10 million lawsuit was put in on the grounds that the film had taken everything from the plot to the characters to even the general structure of the story beats. Now, admittedly, both works do take place in a cabin in the middle of the woods and feature some kind of meta framing. However, the suit was dismissed because there was no evidence to back up the allegedly quote-unquote striking similarities between the work outside of the general premise, which the judge concluded is unprotectable by copyright law, as so many films have used a variation of it in the past. Hilariously though, because the lawsuit got people searching for the book, the Amazon review page for it is actually full of disappointed buyers, a bit annoyed that there aren't actually many similarities between it and the movie they liked. Number 3. A botched motorcycle stunt, Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. One of the most infamous lawsuits in recent memory, the production of Resident Evil: The Final Chapter came under fire after a scene involving a stuntwoman went horribly wrong. Olivia Jackson, star Milla Jovovich's stuntwoman, suffered intense injuries after a motorcycle accident left the performer colliding with one of the camera cranes that didn't move when it was supposed to. Jackson, after being put into a medically induced coma for 2 weeks, suffered a laundry list of serious injuries, and ultimately needed one of her arms to be amputated below the elbow. Years after the event, Jackson sued the production on the grounds that the filmmakers allegedly changed the stunt without telling her about the new conditions. Though the American case was thrown out, THR reported that Jackson won the South African case, where the film had shot, after the judge ruled in her favor against the local production company overseeing that specific sequence, concluding that it was, quote, negligently planned and executed. Number 2. A $900 million lawsuit, The Conjuring. The Conjuring is famously based on the lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren, a pair of apparent real-life demonologists who partnered with Warner Brothers to bring their stories to the big screen. It seemed like a solid partnership, with the 3 main installments and their plentiful spin-offs going on to dominate the box office over the next decade. The series faced some serious heat in 2016 though, when a stonking $900 million lawsuit was filed against the studio. This came from Gerard Brittle, who wrote a book all about the life of the Warrens and alleged to have had a deal with them that meant his consent was required should they ever look to sell their stories to Hollywood. He claimed copyright infringement amongst other allegations to the tune of $900 million. However, this was settled in late 2017 as the parties involved released a joint statement announcing that Brittle had dropped the lawsuit and that filing it in the first place was, quote, a mistake. Number 1. The Helicopter Crash: Twilight Zone, the movie. The fallout of a tragic helicopter crash that led to the deaths of 3 people on the set of The Twilight Zone the movie is far too extensive to fully chronicle here, as it completely changed the way movie productions worked and transformed the regulations involved. Hell, there's a huge Wikipedia page on it that barely covers the cliff notes. However, the crux of it is that a scene involving a helicopter maneuvering around special effects mortar fire resulted in the vehicle's rotor failing. The helicopter crashed and killed 3 actors in the scene, Vic Morrow and child actors Renee Shin-Yi Chen and Micah Din Lee, while the performers inside the vehicle were also injured. In response, a whole bunch of lawsuits were filed and criminal cases were opened that lasted years. Director John Landis and other key personnel were acquitted of manslaughter charges after a lengthy trial, though Landis did admit to breaking child labor laws in order to shoot the scene at night with the children without the proper authorization. The children of Vic Morrow as well also settled out of court on their lawsuit over their father's death, while the studio overhauled their safety standards for all future productions following the grim tragedy.